If we want to destroy the structure of Algerian society, its capacity for resistance, we must first of all conquer the women. We must go and find them behind the veil where they hide themselves, and in the houses where the men keep them, out of sight. Those were the words of Frantz Fanon, who believed that the only way to conquer Algeria during its war of independence against French colonial rule was by forcing women to remove their hijab/veil. Thus, in 1958, unveiling ceremonies were performed, where French women would help Algerian women in removing their headscarves. Unfortunately, these women were raped and were threatened to lose their families if they did not agree to do so. These ceremonies were France's start to limiting women's agency towards their bodies. Today, France has banned women from wearing the niqab as well as banning any female under the age of 18 from wearing the hijab. This was done to stop Islamist separatism and promote liberation, freedom, and equality. Thus, the question I ask today is France really suffering from Islamist separatism? And will banning the hijab prevent it? Hello and welcome back to In Depth. I'm Al-Rawi, and today we discuss France's hijab ban through Althusser's ideological and repressive state apparatus. At the same time as introducing laws prohibiting Muslim girls under the age of 18 from wearing the Islamic headscarf, France also enacted legislation that set the age for girls' sexual consent to be 15 years old. By limiting women's agency on their bodies, women are forced to bear any violence against them. Women who disobey the law by wearing the niqab, for example, are condemned, imprisoned, and even fined. In order to put this bill into effect, France committed violence against women. These actions by the French government can be better understood through Althusser's repressive state apparatus. In his book, Religion: The Basics, Mallory Nye describes the repressive state apparatus by stating that, and I quote, physically and forcefully upholds the rule of law, which comes to show that France is more concerned with banning women's religious freedom rather than ending France's suffering from Islamist separatism. Thus, when a Muslim woman chooses not to accept this discrimination and chooses to stand up for her freedom, they are put under the threat of violence. We can relate Nye's explanation of Althusser's notion to how the French government pushes its ideologies and ideals under the guise of more freedom and equality for women, whereas in reality, women are exploited to accept these ideologies through a repressive apparatus. With that, Muslim women are left with two choices. Either they accept this authority, or they end up in prison. So by looking at the situation from Althusser's perspective, we can see how the French government is choosing to exercise its power by violently harassing Muslim women. To elaborate more on the situation, Time magazine has interviewed Ali Al-Saji, an associate professor of philosophy at McGill University, for their article on the hijab controversy. A big takeaway from what Al-Saji tells Time is that what might seem like France is suffering from Islamist separatism is actually French colonization against the diversity of religions. See, banning the hijab would not prevent Islamist separatism because it is a symbol of faith, not of hate. However, the ban has prevented other things that the French government might suffer from instead. This discriminatory law that was passed out against Muslim women is actually causing educational and economic downfall. France is home to 5 million Muslims, which is the largest Muslim population in Europe. Doesn't this mean that this minority should feel more accepted there? Unfortunately, not. Another way France is actively working on banning the Islamic headscarf is by banning it in schools. Schools are a non-state organization that are explicitly working towards implementing state values and ideologies on their students, even if they don't necessarily agree with the law. We can definitely see how this can be better understood through Althusser's ideological state apparatus. The ideological state apparatus, as explained by Nye, is the notion that describes how non-state institutions, such as schools and churches, work to promote the state's values. Thus, to further integrate this discriminatory law against Muslim women, the French government exercises its power in schools, media, and maybe even mosques. This law, however, brought with it an employment gap that could potentially harm the French economy. Since they have been ripped off of their agency and freedom, female Muslim students have been doing worse than their non-Muslim counterparts and even don't have the motivation to attend school anymore. That's how the ideological and repressive state apparatus go hand in hand. See, repressive state apparatus does not only operate through physical violence, but also through coercion. These two processes are used together by the French government to embed discrimination against Muslim women and ban them from their religious symbols. Thus, many Muslim girls are ending up not finishing their education and sometimes end up becoming a housewife because the public does not accept them for how they look. See, the thing about the ideological apparatus is that Muslim women cannot do anything to change these views except through voting. But each candidate is not different than the other. Not to mention, many French citizens believe that their options are only Macron or Macron. Lately, we've been clearly seeing this in the French candidacy. French elections are just around the corner, and if there's one thing almost all the candidates agree on, it's the banning of the hijab. Time magazine explains that many French politicians have defended the legislation, claiming it strengthens the country's secularism. They are even promising harsher measures on Muslim women because, according to French politicians, this will save France from the Islamist separatism that they are supposedly suffering from. French citizens are fighting to defend democracy and calling these French elections simply a performance without any presentation of solutions or real politics. So when it comes to getting some change and getting religious rights and freedom, French Muslim women and all French citizens have next to no chance at all. And as Albert Memmi in his book The Colonizer and the Colonized writes, if colonization destroys the colonized, it also rots the colonizer. When trying to grasp the French government's law, Althusser's notion of interpellation comes in handy. According to Nye, the ideological state apparatus goes through a process of interpellation, where people believe they are not being subjugated and have the freedom to select their views, practices, and behaviors, but they're actually subject to the control of the dominant group, which wields more power and influence even through non-state organizations. Althusser's notion shows that women are considered subjects. They are compelled to remove their Islamic headscarves through, as Nye describes it, male apparatuses. In this case, it's President Macron. As a result, the goal is for not wearing the hijab to become part of a woman's identity in the future, which she may assume stems from her own choices and agency, but is actually impacted by the ideologies of authority figures. In countries where the hijab is not banned, many Muslim women choose to permanently remove it because they no longer identify with it. This isn't necessarily a wrong thing they're doing because it is their freedom to identify with certain religious symbols over others. But looking at it through Althusser's lens, it could suggest that these women are taking part in an oppressive ideology. And this is how Althusser's theories of interpellation, ideological apparatus, and repressive apparatus play a role in the French government's decision to prohibit Muslim women under the age of 18 from wearing the Islamic headscarf. But again, maybe they aren't suffering from Islamist separatism and are just discriminating against Muslim women. Thus, it could be safe to say that banning the hijab is not preventing Islamist separatism, but it's preventing freedom of religion that is set out against innocent Muslim women. This is In Depth. Thanks for tuning in.